Our school has managed to organize an interview with a NASA astronaut, Andrew J. Feustel. In fact, that's why I'm wearing this hoodie. Because I worked with NASA for like 30 minutes. You can of course watch the full version of the interview by clicking on the link down below in the description, but these are the highlights of the interview. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give you astronaut Andrew J. Feustel. Our headmaster led by example and asked the first question, but he didn't want to know anything about space. He actually wanted to know what it feels like when astronauts return from space to Earth.
Okay, that's a good question. It is difficult to come back from space because gravity feels very heavy on our body. So physically, it's hard to come back from space. And I do miss space because you can see the image behind me is a beautiful picture of Earth. And that's a view that we get to see every single day. And when you come back to the planet, we miss that view, that wonderful image that we see of Earth. We come back, and in order to see space, we have to look up instead of look down.
One of our third graders followed, and I repeat, it was a third grader, and he wanted to know what it's like being in space.
That's a great question. Being in space is a little bit like a dream. And I tell people, whatever you imagine being in space is, that's kind of what it's like. So we don't even have words that can explain how beautiful and wonderful the feeling is. And physically, we feel like we're floating in water when we're in weightlessness.
One of our fifth graders likes the why questions, and he wanted to know why Andrew Feustel became an astronaut.
Ahoy, Matti, thank you. That's a great question. Why did I become an astronaut? When I was young, like your age now, I was very interested in exploration and going to the stars. Every time I would look up at night at the stars, I always wondered what was up there. And in fact, the first time I flew to space, I flew a little book called Cosmic Songs by Jan Neruda, very famous Czech poet and writer. And he had a story that was about frogs, and the frogs were asking their mother, "Hey mom, are there frogs out there too, out in space?" And so as a young person, I was always interested in flying to space. And so I just, as I grew up, I pursued an education that allowed me to have opportunities to fly into space, and eventually I made it and have had some great success. But the reason I became an astronaut is just because I always dreamed of having that opportunity to go to space and experience what spaceflight was like.
The children also couldn't wrap their heads around what it must be like to sleep in space, so they just asked Andrew about it.
To sleep in space, I think we have a picture of Kurticek sleeping in space. So sleeping in space is very interesting because we are always floating. And on Earth, when you lay down in a bed, I think you feel comfortable and you can feel gravity resting your body onto the surface of the bed. But imagine that in space, you never have the feeling of resting or relaxing or sinking into your bed. Your muscles never really relax the same way. So you can see in the picture beside me, that's a picture of Kurticek, but he's actually inside a sleep cabin, which is like a small closet or phone booth. So he's actually inside of a sleeping bag. So when we sleep, we climb inside the closet, and then we get inside of a sleeping bag and we zip the sleeping bag. But we still feel the same way because we're still floating. We're floating just like we were before we got in the sleeping bag. So the difference between sleeping and being awake is that we turn the light off and tell ourselves it's time for bed.
Now seriously, the interview was an incredible experience, and I believe it has motivated the children for a lifetime. Thank you, Houston.